Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think the Global University is a great initiative, and I'm really very happy to be associated with it. And the organization I work for is CODESRIA. We are, happy to partner with it as well. It's difficult to just pinpoint one particular event and say, or one moment, to say that was the happiest of my own life. I think there have been several moments, particularly in terms of my engagement with struggles and the study of struggles. And I think it began when I was a student in Paris, getting to take interest in what was happening both to us as students, our situation. I was involved in something called Gambian Students' Union and was the Secretary General at one point in France, Gambian Students' Union in France. So it then took interest in student struggles. When I was doing my first year, the French government had decided to change the conditions for admitting foreign students to French universities. So there was a big movement to protest against that. But that was in the southeast of France, in the city called Grenoble. And then I took interest in other struggles, of course, going on, struggles against apartheid, struggles in support of Palestine. So I was, as a student, involved in all these things at the same time, organizing the Congress of the Gambian Students' Union in France, and at the same time participating in anti-apartheid committees on campus, but also involving people in town. All the movement for the boycott of apartheid companies or related companies, or companies investing in South Africa and supporting the struggles of the liberation movement in Southern Africa. And at the same time, member of the Palestine Support Committee, also taking great interest in what was going on there. And then when I moved from Grenoble to Paris, I took greater interest into these conditions of immigrants, African immigrants in particular, living in France, housing conditions, problems getting documentation, papers, residential papers, and all the harassment and the racism associated with that. So I would spend let's say, my day doing my studies, and then my evenings and nights involved in those struggles of, there was an association called ASTI, Association de Solidarité avec les Travailleurs Immigrés, which was supporting anti-immigrant struggles. And at the same time, I also took interest in these small groups that were active politically, and that began already while I was in Grenoble. We had a small study group, taking interest in philosophy, Marxist philosophy, progressive philosophies from around the world. And in Paris, so I also had that connection to the movement, people associated with the trade unions and with the political struggles in France itself, studying experiences of China, of Vietnam, Latin American struggles, and so on. So somehow, because my studies were on the socio-economic of development, economics of development, and then later on sociology of development and political sociology, there was a meeting point between what I was reading in the texts and the research I was engaged in, on the one hand about development and conditions, global conditions, how they impact on development processes, and how people are trying to negotiate their way out of the clogs, the whole of the dominant forces, the imperialist powers, and so on the one hand, and on the other hand, seeing the struggles of people concretely who have moved to France for economic reasons, political reasons, many of them claiming to be political refugees, but at the same time we know that for a number of them it was the economic conditions in their countries that get them to move out. So I was interested in the solidarity movement, also working closely with the community, immigrant communities from Gambia, my own country, in Paris, where living in horrible conditions. So all the things that we are doing in other associations, you could see concretely in the way people were living in that place. So that was, as I said, a meeting point between my academic interests and my political interests, basically. So it wasn't very difficult. And sometimes I have the feeling that I learned more outside of my normal curriculum at the university than what I learned from the curriculum itself. And that was very important. When I went back to Gambia after I finished my PhD in Paris, I worked in the rural areas. I was coordinating a network of self-organized and self-managed village associations engaged in savings and credit. And so the project has been going on for some time. It was linked to the Gambian Ministry of Agriculture, but it was autonomous. And that was a great learning experience, going to the villages and working with peasants who are illiterate, or just getting literate in the local languages, learning to know just basic writing skills, and then organizing themselves to say, look, okay, we know we are poor, but we want to change our conditions. And the whole philosophy was, you don't wait for people coming from outside, whether it's the government or somebody else, to help you change your conditions, that you begin with your own self. There was a technical assistance to the project provided by something called International Center for Development and Research, CIDR, based in France also. And what one had the feeling then was that they were trying to transform these peasants into entrepreneurs. Right? You're not to save, you invest here, you make money. And I was uncomfortable with that thing, with that sort of philosophy, and because I could see the limitations of the whole project. The peasants would borrow and then would want to pay, but you pay when you commoditize your produce, groundnuts and millet and so on. At the same time, it was a period when structural adjustment was going on and was in full force, imposed by the World Bank and the IMF. And the marketing boards were dismantled, and the cooperative society was dismantled. And therefore, the peasants were left on their own. So you could see, even if they wanted to pay back their loans, for some of them, they were dependent on the hazards of the market, in the sense that it wasn't easy to find an outlet for their commodities. So you had a lot of people who had coming from the cities with money and buying their produce at very, very low prices and going to sell again. So you could see really the limitation of that whole project, in the sense that it was dependent on the macroeconomic environment that could make it easy or difficult. But the philosophy was quite interesting, of getting peasants to begin by, even as they were trying to reorganize themselves, to put aside a little bit, because the argument was, saving is not about the total amount of wealth you have or money you have. It is about a relationship to what you have and your capacity to think about today and tomorrow. So even in what you have, whether it is little or much, you can set aside something, and then you can invest that in improving your conditions. And the most interesting part of that experience was when so in a sense, it gave me a view of structural adjustment really at the grassroots level, and you see how it was impacting on people's lives. But as I said, one of the interesting moments was when I went on a study tour to Bangladesh, and we went to visit the Grameen Bank. And you see how people were organized and trying to, women in particular, most of the members of the bank were women, to get credit and then invest it in small projects and build houses and raise cattle, and but at the same time the Grameen Charter, the 16-point charter, in which it wasn't only about investing or organizing, it was about a whole lot of things that had to do with the need to educate your kids, the need to grow vegetables and eat most of them rather than sell them first. And that was quite interesting. Of course, it was a highly disciplinary project, the Grameen movement was almost like a movement of discipline in people, basically. And I mean, Professor Yunus argues that, well, look, these are poor and so poor that, you know, left on their own, it's difficult for them to organize and do it. So need some rigor, and one could see the sense in it. But for him, it was a great learning experience, really, but I could see what elements of that could work in the context where I came from, and what elements could not work. But what that had helped me to do is to have a better sense of the processes in the rural areas and agrarian issues and how they were unfolding, you know, playing out in the West African context. So when I had later on when I left that job, I went to work. It was because I went to work for CODESRIA, and I moved in 1994 to CODESRIA to be a program officer for academic freedom to begin with. And in a sense, that sort of you know, enabled me to come back to my great interest in research, because when I was in Paris, we had something called a group Sahel Research, a Sahelian research group. It was basically a West African, an association of West African researchers based in Paris, you know, organizing conferences and debates on issues that are relevant to Africa. And I went back to Gambia. There was no university then. And so my link to CODESRIA while I was in Gambia enabled me to, you know, remain in the networks and get CODESRIA bulletin and be part of some conferences and so on. And we tried to form a group, a national working group in Gambia itself. So when I went to work with CODESRIA, it obviously was an opportunity to be part of this community of scholars that you know, had a take on African issues and on global issues that was, you know, much more interesting than what I was hearing when I was in Paris. And by the way, I think I should say that because as I was studying in Paris in the late 80s and early 90s, it was a time when the attitude to Africa was very negative. People were talking about Afro-pessimism, you know. It's the opposite of what one hears today. These days, it is about Afro-optimism. People are talking about Africa rising, Africa is a new frontier, investment opportunities, and so on. But then, that wasn't the story at all. Then it was a question of this hopeless continent, as one magazine titled it. And every magazine you read, every TV you switch on, and when they begin talking about Africa, it was about the problems, the civil wars, the negative things. And then I was introduced to CODESRIA by some Nigerian friends who were very well connected. And they brought me CODESRIA bulletin, Jibril Ibrahim, Aisha Imam, Amina Mama, who are still very good friends of mine. And so I began reading this thing, and I saw like this is a completely different look and analysis of the situation on the continent. Then I was on the mailing list and I was getting it, but I was so excited but I was reading that I was encouraging all my friends in the Sahel group, research group, the West Africans, to also write and be on the mailing list to get it. And I would photocopy this thing and circulate it. You know, among the Africans I would meet, and even among the other people, you know, who are there. Look, here is a different analysis of this, what is going on in Africa. Then maybe a great moment, talking about moments that are inspiring moments, was 4 days after I defended my thesis, I went to Dakar to participate in the CODESRIA General Assembly. It was the 7th General Assembly of CODESRIA then. And the period then was one of great changes, you know, authoritarian regimes collapsing, social movements rising all over the continent, democratization. And the theme of the assembly was democratization processes in Africa, problems and prospects. And it was, I think, one of the most inspiring moments when you had a lot of these young scholars, and at the same time, big names like Samir Amin and them that I was reading about, you know, Achima Feje, the late Achima Feje, Sandika Mkandawira, all of them were there. And people were debating the crisis in Africa, debating democracy, where it was going. And you could see that there was no complacence whatsoever. People were tough, you know. But there was optimism. There was a spirit that, you know, made the whole thing like, it is not, we can deal with this. Basically, that was the whole thing. And we can change this. And so you could see that thing. And I was so fascinated. At the end of the conference, I had a chance to talk to the executive secretary, Tandika Mkanda, who said, so I said, look, I just see the contrast between what I just left in Paris, this Afro-pessimism, and what I've seen African scholars do here and what I've heard them talk about, and the attitudes are so different. And he told me, of course, Afro-pessimism is a disease of the Europeans, it's a European disease, it's not our problem. So, and I thought that sort of captured the whole thing really very well, they could afford to be Afro-pessimists about our own. We cannot, of our own conditions, so we have to deal with it. And that's the spirit I saw. And then is where I had some of the friendships that I still have today. The first meetings with the people were at that particular conference. And that's what I've seen all over the years and all the subsequent General Assemblies and activities that I've adopted. So when I had the chance to come to work as a program officer at CODESRIA, it obviously was maybe one of the happiest moments I went through. And that was not only about my own research on the issues, but also it gave me an opportunity to see what African scholars are doing a research. And there's not only one way of looking at the issues. It's not a political party, everybody agreeing on one position. But the interesting thing was, whatever the differences were, we had the feeling that there is a basic commitment that we share. There is a relationship to our continent. There is a feeling about the future of the continent being in our own hands and in the hands of the Africans. And that whatever happens, we'll take it from there. And whether you're talking about cooperation, solidarity, or whatever, it is sort of to refer to Amilcar Cabral, who was a great African leader, led the liberation struggles in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. Cabral said, he was talking about the, in their movement, some of the people fighting in the country were saying, look, I want to go now outside and help, raise support, for our movement. And others who were outside wanted to come back in and said, look, I wanted now to be back on the ground to fight. So he told them, look, this thing is like cooking rice. If you are cooking rice, you obviously have to cook rice in the pot. But for the rice to cook in the pot, you need fire and wood and everything around it to heat from outside for the thing inside to change. So our struggle is like that one. The changes will take place inside the country, right? But we need what is happening outside of the country to facilitate, to support. And I think if we are talking about transformation on the continent again, and international cooperation and solidarity and so on, that is I think a good way of putting it. The processes are going to unfold internally, and the internal factors will be determining in everything that happens. Change will have to come from within. Development, as the late Professor Kizerbo said, is not about ready-made things, it's about ideas. C'est idée, développement clé en tête, c'est pas clé en main. It's not, as the French expression, turnkey factories that you buy, but these are ideas in our heads that should be driving what happens to our own countries and our own future. And I think that is really a fundamental principle of self-reliance, understood in a very creative way. And that is what I believe at the level of scholarship we are also trying to do at CODESRIA, and with Latin American colleagues, the Asian colleagues are in the same struggle, which to begin with is a struggle about the narratives, about the understanding we have of these issues, about the understanding we have of history, of global history, our own histories, about decentering history. It is not the whole of the processes of the world being driven from one particular point, which is the West these days. We know historically that hasn't always been the case. There was a time when China was the dominant force and things were driven from there, and then it moved to some other places before it got to the West. So the history is made from different points, and I think every peoples have to be subjects of their own histories. And we are saying, from a scientific point of view, engaging with the literature, with the social science theories and concepts and paradigms and development paradigms that we inherited sort of through our contact with the West is an important thing. Engaging them, contesting them, transforming what has been called the colonial library before you can begin thinking about framing alternatives. If your understanding of issues is skewed, is determined or too influenced by other people's perspectives on those very things, then your imagination about how to change them will be affected. So I say the first line of battle, as far as we are concerned as scholars, is that one. It's on the terrain of scholarship to deconstruct, to make sure that the Eurocentric ways of looking at the world and of development and the dominant paradigms about development, are interrogated, challenged, contested from our own perspectives. And at the same time, that is also the way in which we can produce knowledge to contribute to the framing of the issues and make knowledge truly universal. Yeah. So that is the thing I'm in now, and obviously being the executive of CODESRIA puts me in a particular position in terms of pushing that viewpoint. And we see it happening with building upon all the work done by people like Samir Amin, who started it all. The turning point in the history of CODESRIA was when Samir came in the scene and organized this meeting in Dakar in 1973 and hosted CODESRIA for a long time, taking great personal risks to put resources from the institution he was running then. He was heading EDEP, is a planning institute, a UN planning institute in Dakar. And then, financing CODESRIA through that, lending the money until the debt was very big, until they were able to raise their own funds, and then grew and then went out. And he did that with other organizations, with an NGO called ENDA, Environment and Development in Africa. That's a big one now. He also supported the creation of the African Women Researchers for Development. So that's the thing. And I think in that whole context, it's interesting to note the connections across the Global South. Samil was a global scholar, well connected. He taught in France and all over the South. Where he belonged, he was very clear. He's a Southern scholar. He was an African scholar and a Southern scholar. But who could speak, in every forum. At the same time, he was well connected. And he was present when the Latin Americans were creating the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. That was a few years before CODESRIA. And then they decided that, like we are doing here in the Bandung Conference, that we want to bring the Latin Americans in, we want to spread the Bandung spirit, we want people to take it up. That was exactly the decision they made in Latin America when they were forming CLACSO, that we will go back to our different continents and form councils like CLACSO, and then connect these councils together to link the knowledge production processes across the South, to contest dominant paradigms, to contribute knowledge produced from this are contributing to global knowledge, to make global knowledge truly universal, and not overly dominated by knowledge produced from the West, from the North. Right? And so I see a kind of parallel between what we are discussing here in this Bandung Conference and that spirit, which I think was, in a sense, an expression of the Bandung spirit, of autonomy and self-reliance, intellectually, scientifically, development-wise, and so on. So a lot of things which contribute to, I think, framing my own worldview today. I think it, in a sense, maybe also takes me back to my own early childhood. The family I grew up in is a family where people cherish knowledge. My grandfather was a scholar. He came from a milieu where he could have been a contestant for power in some of the ruling families then. He chose scholarship and kept away from the political struggles and thought his own calling was to engage in knowledge, learning. And I started at a Quranic school, but was encouraged all along to take great interest in scholarship. And obviously, the kind of scholarship they envisioned then was different from the Western kind of scholarship I went into. So to get me to school was a big struggle. There's an interesting novel called Ambiguous Adventure, written by a Senegalese intellectual called Cheikh Hamidou Kane. It's translated into many languages now, but the original was written in French in the early 60s. And it is the story of the encounter with the West, with the colonial administration, about school. Should the Fulani of the Senegal River Valley send their kids to school? And what are the arguments for and what are the arguments against? And I think every Fulani kid, or almost many African young people, I think, could identify with that whole dilemma. you know, at one point the West coming and with weapons and technologies that our people were not familiar with, and that gave them superiority in the encounter. So they were able to win and conquer them without being right in doing that. But they also could do other things that the local people couldn't do. So the argument in favor of sending kids to school, knowing that the school will, as the great woman the main personality in the book is actually a woman called La Grande Royale, who was saying, look, we know that this Western school will kill in our kids what we would want to protect in them, our cultures and so on. But we also know that we need to learn from these people how to link wood to wood, because they could, which is the technology basically. Because I think the encounter revealed a gap, a technological gap and a development gap, and they were interested in bridging that. So learning from the West, what the West had that we didn't have, to make ourselves sort of better and stronger. And so the thing about the culture, there was a lot of skepticism about these Western schools and what Western education would do to the people of my community. But at the end of the day, they had no choice. You know, so when my first day at school, I remember was a drama, and my mother and everybody told me, wow, he's gone to school. This is a tragedy. And then gradually they got to see, you know, that I could read, that I could help understand certain things, and that was, you know, I think appreciated in a sense. But the great fear was how people would change, and I think that is a genuine concern, because one sees the elites of our societies being globalized in a big way, imitating elites from anywhere, being disconnected from their own peoples, you know, espousing, you know, values and, you know, interests that are of a class nature, you know, and that sort of gets them to be closer in many respects to, or to identify in many respects with elites like them from elsewhere than with the people in their own countries, and particularly the poor people and the masses who are struggling. So I think it makes me happy to think, it has to be proven, that I think that both professionally, working with an organization like CODESRIA, you know, and in my own personal interests, we try to reconnect, you know, with our values on the continent, and look at the world with our own lenses. As Cabral said, we need to look at the world with our own lenses. We need to think with our own heads, in our own context, rather than look at the world from where other people are, or with the lenses of other people. That's my story.
Thank you. I remember the first time we met was when you were still program director.
Yes.
And
yes.
then we were in this panel with Sun Yat-min, Emmanuel Wallerstein,
right.
myself and you.
Right.
And at the World Social Forum.
Exactly, in Durban.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I was after you spoke, I was also already very impressed
Well,
with the way
you.
you look at the issues. And of course, we are always talking about alternatives.
Right.
And I think from what you just said, the dilemmas that you faced in Africa would be the same as what we have in Asia and now in China, because there's people look up to the West as the example. But at the same time, having contempt for the plundering, for the imperialism.
Right.
And so this is very mixed. But then for you, in your thoughts about alternatives, you also put a lot of emphasis on the question of sustainability and on ecology. So how does that come in? Because with many scholars, so the focus would, especially from the third world, then the focus would be on the question about economic growth or national becoming power. But then for you, you have these other perspectives.
Yes, look, I think the encounter with the West sort of brought major changes at various levels. First of all, even in terms of knowledge production and scholarship, we have old traditions in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America, among the Indians and so on. Africa has some of the oldest universities, and some of them, one of them is still giving degrees in Morocco, the Karawin University. It was founded by a woman, which is interesting to note. And it is still in existence for universities like the Azhar. Some of these are older than the old universities of Oxford, or even the, or universities in the West, right, in the Middle Ages. And there were intellectual traditions. So you go back to the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, this big library in Alexandria with the scrolls. People were writing, centuries ago. And so what happened with the arrival of the, of the West in the scene is that they came with the modern university, they came with social sciences as you know them, and the sciences as they are practiced now. And obviously, in many respects, it was an improvement in the way scholarship was organized and evaluations of those scholarships were carried out. But what it did was to completely sideline all the wealth of scholarship that existed before and the traditions. And secondly, not only existing before then, but also all the local knowledges, all the ways in which communities are dealing with issues, and there is a lot of knowledge in the societies out there. And all that was sort of sidelined again in the process. And I think people are now coming around full circle to say, look, we need to reconnect with the past, and we need to connect with these other knowledges out there, and stop pretending that the only places where you can have knowledge of value is at the university, for example. Right. And I think if you're talking about sustainability, we have to do that reconnection with our past and with the other knowledges and the processes that are happening out there that are of an ecological nature, they are of various natures. Secondly, the African experience with some of which is referred to here in terms of Pan-Africanism. I think we needed to explain a little bit more what we mean when we talk about Pan-Africanism, which was about, again, people protesting, against the falsification of history that tended to make history as if it has only one source and is driven from only one point. And secondly, contesting injustices that existed, that have happened to the African peoples, and say, look, the way to deal with this thing is to come together, and then again, engage, contest where that is required, and build an Africa that is, more fitting as a home for us and for African peoples than what we see happening in Africa that is occupied, dominated, exploited in so many different ways, and the forests chopped down, and the resources, mineral resources, human resources being exploited and drained and taken out in so many different ways. So I think the issue of sustainability has many dimensions to it, and it definitely has to be grounded into our own thinking, our own realities, our own ways of contemplating the world and relating with global processes. It's not an easy struggle. It will be very difficult because the interests that are at stake are many. We have interests that have developed within our own continents that are closely linked to this global process, that have an interest in neoliberalism spreading because they are at the top end of it. The Ivorians calling the people people of the top, and so they're part of the dominant classes that are closely linked to multinationals and to global institutions that have an interest in the status quo, or in fact in situations continuing as they are. And then we know obviously that the peasants, those who are engaged in these small schemes trying to survive, or farming to keep their families alive, let alone even to think about accumulating, they have no interest in that thing continuing because they'll be trapped forever in those conditions where they are. So I think the discussion about the future of the Earth, the future of the planet, is should be informed by what our research on what has been the impact of these things in the real lives of a lot of people, has been, number one. Number two, learning from all these other knowledges and experiences, and what people, even after some governments have been trying out some interesting ways of organizing their economies and framing policies, and say, look, it is possible to do something different. it is possible for people to relate with each other differently, for countries to relate with each other differently, and the terms of engagement do not have to be exploitative, power domineering sort of engagement, because we have no interest in those terms. We find ourselves at the receiving end, and we are the ones paying the price, and so I think from a southern perspective, what we need to do is to connect, the different initiatives that we are engaging, and try to bring a lot of pressure to bear on those who are representing us in global forums where they're negotiating. And as you say, all the governments are in this, crazy run for higher growth rates, even when it has been demonstrated that the way you generate growth matters a lot. If it is jobless growth, if it is growth that is based on the exploitation of natural resources and human resources, with no thinking about what the long-term effect of that, exploitation is, then that growth will end up becoming too expensive in terms of the numbers of people who will be marginalized, the resources that will be plundered, and I think it all has to do with the space we give to the market in the way we organize our lives, in the way we organize our economies. Historically, where we have had interesting experiences of development, whether you're talking about Scandinavian countries or China or other countries, even historically, elsewhere, it is because you've had a state that sort of wouldn't let the market just do. In other words, what neoliberalism has done is basically to overstate the capacity of the market to rule or to regulate. I think the market has to be governed, and it has to be governed in a way that sort of protects the public good, that protects the long-term interests of societies, that protects the long-term sustainability, of life on our planet. Right? Otherwise, what will be driving individually all these, companies and interests is, again, how to maximize the gains that they're making, every time. Not worrying about how that will impact on people's lives. So it is possible. I think there's enough evidence now to say that it is possible for economies to be organized differently. It is not a fatality that so many people are left on the margins and have to go, or living on a shoestring, or have their livelihoods, being very precarious. But framing that alternative in a coherent way, it has been a challenge for many of us, both from a research point of view and from an activist point of view. I think we are better at critiquing the dominant model than at imagining alternatives for organizing. Although if we look very closely at the way social movements have been organized and how some peasant communities have been working, or even workers' movements have been functioning, one could see a lot of ideas and elements of that alternative. I think the last thing I want to say about that is that it is going to be a struggle. The dominant forces will want to continue to dominate. So if you want to change that, it will require good organization, and strong determination, which is where again the Bandung spirit is important. Connect in the sense that it requires joining forces across the world to increase our power to negotiate and whether it's trade agreements or other or things having to do with climate change, it will require a lot of negotiation, I believe, and pressure and resistance from the South to do that, to make the outcomes favorable to us. Yeah. Right.